You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I'm quite excited today because this week and next week are special event podcasts. We are doing a two-parter. Yes. This came about because Paul Alexander, a professor of English at Hunter College of the City University of New York, and an expert on the work of Sylvia Plath, had interviewed me some years ago for a biography he was writing about Sylvia Plath. Rough Magic, it was to be called. He knew of my connection to her through my own writing in her defense, and if you don't know about that so-called literary scandal already, an explanation of it will soon follow on this podcast and next week. In any event, Paul had engineered a special one-day symposium on Plath's work, on her life and on her influences, to take place at Hunter with an array of distinguished writers and poets appearing on various panels. They included Susan Cheever, Vijay Seshraddy, Donna Massini, Amanda Golden, Heather Clark, Peter K. Steinberg, Mark Doty, and Honor Moore, and Eva Salzman, and the actor Kathleen Chalfont, with the keynote coming at the end of the day. Paul invited me to do the keynote, shared with my friend and colleague Gloria Steinem, who had been at Smith College as a young student at the same time as Plath. And so, before a live audience at Hunter College in New York, Gloria and I sat down to talk about the work and life of this fine poet who was to become such a powerful figure in the imagination and in the aesthetics of so many women, and in their politics. The keynote was also aired on Zoom and is accessible on YouTube. Harold Holzer, the Jonathan F. Fanton Director of the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute at Hunter, kindly gave us permission to use that double keynote, focusing on a great American poet and her effect on the women's movement on this podcast. So I will be bringing you part 1 in this podcast and part 2 a week from today. My gratitude goes to Jennifer J. Rabb, Hunter College President, to Paul Alexander, Symposium Director, who has been a major voice in defense of Plath's poetic brilliance and political relevance, to Harold Holzer for his generosity, to Julie Rosenberg for her diligence, and of course to Gloria for sharing both stage and insights, as the two of us have done for more than half a century. We have to take a short break now so that we can then play part 1 of the Plath Symposium keynote, uncut and without interruption. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Here is part 1 of the Symposium on the Work and Life of Sylvia Plath at Hunter College in New York with Gloria Steinem and Robin Morgan.
Good evening and welcome to Roosevelt House. I'm Harold Holzer, and I have the honor of serving as director of Roosevelt House. And on behalf of Jennifer Rabb, the president of Hunter College, I want to welcome you to, we call it the house that Sarah Roosevelt built, Eleanor Roosevelt inhabits, and Jennifer Rabb saved. Some of you may know that President Raab is beginning the final 3 months of her 22-year presidency of Hunter College. We are in a space that was the Roosevelt family kitchens, which she had excavated to make an auditorium, and really everything about the preservation and repurposing of the house was due to her commitment and work. She could have sold it at a time when CUNY schools were in financial distress, but she decided against a one-shot infusion of cash, and this is the result. So we thank her more than ever in these last few months. I hope some of you, I recognize some of you from the earlier sessions. It's been an extraordinary day of readings and analysis of Sylvia Plath, and I will acknowledge the person who gets all the credit for that in a minute, but it's really been an unprecedented event for the House. And it comes at the end of Women's History Month, which we always observe here with a number of events, all of them connected to Eleanor Roosevelt. Remember, we're in the House where the first woman ever appointed to a cabinet position was interviewed just upstairs and demanded that Governor Roosevelt, President-elect Roosevelt, commit himself to the social safety net, which became the New Deal right here in this extraordinary building. And as FDR once said in announcing the jobs programs that were first conceived here, artists have to eat too. And we know he meant writers and poets as well, because the New Deal Federal Writers Project supported the likes of Saul Bellow and Richard Wright, Eudora Welty, Conrad Aiken, and for a time John Cheever, whose daughter Susan spoke here earlier today. So that's our FDR connection to today's event. Also, the words inscribed on the back of our wall, the eternal resonance of his Four Freedoms speech, delivered, by the way, and after 8 years I finally realized this, because there's always someone sitting there, delivered on January 6th. I never realized that. And those freedoms begin with freedom of speech, which presumably includes the poets and writers who have been banned in Florida, 175 in one county. So we think about freedom of speech today. One more shout out for Eleanor. Her My Day column, published over 3 decades and widely syndicated, is not great literature like the literature we're going to talk about today, but she always managed to produce a kind of a thought-provoking gem about things that were on her mind in her columns, including poetry, believe it or not. In the literary world, she observed in 1953, the poets have the hardest time to get published, and that must change. She was actually promoting one poet in particular, Charmel Irish, who also happened to be an art forger, but that's another story. He charmed Eleanor. And then Eleanor made another important observation. I think a country without poets and a period when no poets are recognized shows a lack of the finer feelings of a nation. So here we are in Eleanor's house at an event she no doubt would have approved of. So we're thrilled to be reaffirming freedom of speech, exploring and hearing the work of Sylvia Plath today, and tonight ending our symposium with a dazzling cast, which brings me to this evening and offering a Hunter and Roosevelt House welcome to the extraordinary people here this evening for the keynote session. My friend Robin Morgan, the poet of the women's movement, who you will hear more about in a moment from our host. The inimitable, invincible Gloria Steinem, who I've been honored to know for almost 50 years. For this entire gathering, we owe our thanks to Paul Alexander. Hunter teacher, author, playwright, documentarian, chronicler of Sylvia Plath, who brought the symposium idea to us, this unlikely idea of using Eleanor's house for an exploration of a great woman poet, and has created this extraordinary event for us today, a monumental day for both Plath and Roosevelt House. Paul, we're very grateful to you. This has been just remarkable, and with that, it is a great pleasure to turn the proceedings over to Paul Alexander.
So I would like to echo a couple of things that Harold said. First of all, welcome to Hunter and welcome to Roosevelt House, as he said. And welcome to the Sylvia Plath Symposium at Hunter College. For many of you, you know that for Plath, 2023 marks the 60th anniversary of her death and the 90th anniversary of her birth year. So those two landmarks seemed appropriate to hold a symposium. And Harold and President Rob are good enough to support this. And so here we are. It's been a remarkable day today. I would like to start by thanking President Rob. Literally, without her support, this wouldn't have happened. She's our only sponsor. And how often is it that you get a president of a university willing to support poetry? But she did. And I got to thank her personally upstairs. But it also wouldn't have happened without Harold and his extraordinary team here. These are such pros. So I want to thank you, Harold, for bringing this in. We had two morning academic panels that were just terrific, and then an afternoon poetry, poets panel, which was also great. And so we're tonight exploring Plath and the whole, the way that she affected the women's rights movement, the whole issue of feminism, and the way they have championed her work through the years. But for example, without Robin, she wouldn't have gained that early success that really made her a name that had to been dealt with. So it's quite, remarkable that we have the two women here that are responsible for that early response to Plath outside of the literary world. And now to the final part of the day. I would like to introduce Robin Morgan and Gloria Steinem. You don't get to do this very often, so I hope I don't screw it up, but I'll try. Robin Morgan is an award-winning poet, as well as a novelist, political theorist, feminist activist, journalist, and best-selling author. Robin has published 22 books, including 7 volumes of poetry. The two most recent being A Hot January and Dark Matter, with a new book of poems, Harvesting Darkness, due out later this year. Her now classic anthologies, Sisterhood is Powerful, Sisterhood is Global, Sisterhood is Forever, and the Women's Anthology for a New Millennium are considered cornerstones of global feminism. Other recent books include Saturday's Child, a memoir, her best-selling The Demon Lover, The Roots of Terrorism, her nonfiction work, Fighting Words, a Toolkit for Combating the Religious Right, her historical novel, The Burning Time, and her newest novel, Parallax. Her works have been translated into 13 languages. Her first poetry book, Monster, caused great controversy in literary circles because one of the poems, Arraignment, accused Ted Hughes of being responsible for the death of Sylvia Plath. And it inspired public demonstrations against Hughes by women across the Commonwealth, and I think here too, some, didn't it? Robin, yes. A recipient of the National Endowment of Arts Prize in Poetry, plus numerous other honors, and former editor-in-chief of Ms. Magazine. She has traveled the globe working with women. She is co-founder with the late Simone de Beauvoir and president of the Sisterhood is Global Institute and co-founder of the Women's Media Center, along with Gloria Steinem and Jane Fonda. An architect of contemporary U.S. feminism and a leader in the international women's movement for 50 years, she writes and hosts Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan, an award-winning podcast Huffington Post has called talk radio with a brain. We all need that. To find her popular blog, you go to her website, which is robinmorgan.net. Gloria Steinem graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Smith College in 1956, and then on a Charles Bowles Fellowship spent 2 years in India where she was influenced by the Gandhian activism. She also received the first doctorate of human justice awarded by Simmons College. In 1968, she was one of the founders of New York Magazine. Do people know that? No. And 3 years later, as we all know, she founded Ms. Magazine and remained one of its editors for 15 years. She continues to serve as a contributing editor today. As an author and journalist, Steinem has written numerous articles on an array of subjects from politics to sports to women's issues, as well as 11 books, including The Truth Will Set You Free, but First It Will Piss You Off. My Life on the Road, Moving Beyond Words, Revolution from Within, and Outrageous Acts and Everyday Rebellions, all published in the United States. And in India, she published As If Women Matter. As an activist, she co-founded the National Women's Political Caucus, very famously, that's such an important movement, and the Free to Be Foundation. She is the founding president of the Ms. Foundation for Women, a national multiracial, multi-issue fund that supports grassroots projects to empower women and girls. And also a founder of the Take Your Daughters to Work Day. Her numerous awards include the National Gay Rights Activist Award, a Liberty Award for the Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund, the Freedom Award from the National Civil Rights Museum, the Eleanor Roosevelt, here we go, this is appropriate, Valkill Medal Award, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. It is my honor to introduce Living History, Robin Morgan and Gloria Steinem.
I didn't know I did all that.
Gloria, that's only half of your biography.
It's a function of being old, really, really, really.
Trust me, you did all that.
Yeah, well, what about you? Yes.
Yeah, we're old. I keep saying to friends, I don't know how this happened. I'm now 82, and last week I was 38. You know how this happened? I
didn't know, but I'm 88, so I'm here to comfort you.
Well, as long as we're trooping down the halls of forever, we'll do it together.
I discovered just by research that the oldest woman in the world is 130. So.
And she's a feminist, probably.
A tired feminist, right? All right, I'm going to speak first only because
Please do.
I encountered Sylvia Plath first, not because I was so smart, but because she was a year ahead of me in Smith College. And she was someone we all kind of knew because even the professors said her poetry was good. We were totally knocked out by that. Then also, I'm sorry to say, there was a time during the summer when by accident or on purpose, I don't know, she was thought to have attempted suicide and was found under the front porch in some way. And I'm sorry to tell you that the Smith students kind of regarded that as romantic, dramatic. I mean, how crazy is that? But it did make us aware of her at a time when the rest of the world was really quite conservative. The war had ended, so the period after the war was devoted to giving us back to what was thought to be normal, which of course was very conservative, and the goal, it seemed to me, of most Smith students was to get engaged. People used to hold up their hands, their left hands, when they wanted to speak in class in order to show their... You can't make this stuff up, okay? So I just want to express how miraculous it was, and probably how difficult it was, to be Sylvia on campus. We knew her mainly because even the faculty thought her poetry was good. We were totally knocked out by that. And she was already kind of in a world beyond us, but she then came back to Smith later with Ted Hughes to teach and came full circle. But I want you to hear from Robin, who really encountered her as an accomplished poet after her days as a student.
We're just going to throw it back and forth, if that's okay with you, because one of us can't hold on to it for very long. So. Your turn. The strange thing, neither of us knew her, although I think I felt as if I had inhaled her. But her take on Smith in letters and in the journals and of the time and writing to her mother was lovely. Lovely. Everything was lovely. Everything was perfect. The furnishings were lovely. The students were lovely. The fresh women were lovely. It was the smiler, what she came to call the smiler in her. You remember how we were told by Harry Reasoner and people we shouldn't smile so much? Yeah. So the 50s, which we all know is an absolutely glorious time for women, God, were just this nightmarish period. I mean, and her lifelong battle with domesticity, I think, is one theme to keep in mind, because Smith was full of it. They got some women went for their VAs, some women went for their MAs, and when they lifted their hand,
MRS, yes.
The MRS, that's right. And we, this was later on, this was a good 10 years later on, but when we were in Witch, we used to do, have...
You may have to explain which.
Well, Witch stood for WITCH, otherwise known as Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell. You couldn't get away with that name today. But it was guerrilla theater and guerrilla actions, like oozling glue into the locks of the stock exchange. At that point, they had great, huge black gold and brass doors, and they had a little, and we just oozled it, and then we had a huge demonstration and lots of press. But we went back at 4 a.m. to oozle the crazy glue into the locks, and of course, when they showed up the next day, guess what? The doors wouldn't open. So, which was, completely insouciant and outrageous, and so. But among the things we would do was we would put mimeographed papers of our analyses and our various theses of things, which were decidedly not Marxian and Engels and boring words ending in TION and MISM, and we would stock them and mimeograph. My arms have never recovered from the mimeograph.
How many of you remember a mimeograph machine? I'm just asking.
Yeah, precisely. And so we would schlep them in shopping bags to women's campuses. And I remember we went to Smith. You were gone by this time. But we went to Smith, and we were absolutely appalled. They were giving a course in how to pour tea and how to do an afternoon tea. And I always thought that Smith was, somehow had some muscle in the brain part. But it was appalling. Anyway, so she thought, however, that it was lovely, and the struggle, this lifelong struggle between her wanting to be a writer and a poet in particular, and a free being, and the genius that she actually was, and a working woman with as well, domesticity and a loving husband and children. So that, when I say I inhaled her, I identified hugely with that, because I, even 10 years later, she was a poet, I was a poet. She married a poet, I married a poet. She married a difficult, to say the very least, poet. I married a difficult poet. She had children. I had a child, a son. Hers were much younger when she, died, actually. But my son's middle name was Ariel, for two reasons: for Shakespeare and for Plath. So when her book, I was already a feminist. I don't know if you remember. Yeah, we had already met by then. We go back over 50 years, this friendship. And so, but when I had already written a little poem called Monster, and it had become, depending on your view, either infamous or famous, because it named women in the left, men in the left, for their sexist behavior by name, and and one didn't do that, so they became fairly upset. But when her book, when Ariel came out, it was the first time that I was able to see a path between my politics and my art. And that meant for me everything, because it was then suddenly seamless. I don't think people can fully comprehend, certainly not younger people, how much she transformed our language. Because before, the poems were permitted about men's genitalia. If you were an academic poet, you could write about the rods and staffs. And if you were a beat poet, you could say cocks and pricks and kind of like that. But you could not ever say vagina. You could never say clitoris. You couldn't say kitchen. You couldn't use the words toothpaste or diaper or playpen in a poem. Those were considered, well, they're just not the stuff of poetry. Whereas, of course, cocks and pricks and kind of were, supposedly. So this, when I first read Plath, I was completely blown away. And I think most women were. This was the language we knew. This was our tongue. We spoke in it. We lived in it. This was the making visible the alternate reality of more than half the human species. And it still moves me when I think today that one woman sitting alone in the coldest winter known to Britain in British memory, with a husband who drank and beat her at one point, so she miscarried, and had all of the literati as his friends, so that she couldn't get published anymore, because they, of course, owned all the literary reviews and the little magazines, and his cruelties toward her and their children were extraordinary. I have, and I'm going to get into some of them a little bit later, I have two things that I'm going to read a couple of small things from. One is her letters, the second volume of her letters, particularly those to Ruth Barnhouse, who had been her therapist and to whom she kept writing. And the other being a piece of mine that never got published, like so much that I wrote about Plath at a certain point, that was commissioned by The Guardian. Please, please, please. And they nagged because I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I've done it. I've had it. Okay, no, you have to do it. So I did this piece around the time that the Barnhouse letters were coming out about Ted and what Ted really was and who and what he did. And most of it, most people don't know. I'm going to read little sections of it as I go. But I would love it if you would. I don't think young people can understand. I sound like one of those, I had to walk 6 miles in the snow with only my socks on. But I don't think they know that when we when I got married, I wasn't able to keep my name. I wasn't able to get a loan.
You couldn't have your own credit card. You couldn't keep your own name. You had to go to court to get your own name back. I mean, there's some of us here who remember this, right? And that's what Sylvia was, dealing with.
That's right. Yeah. And at the same time, she was drawn to it. It was extremely, that was 10 years earlier, remember, and those 10 years were very meaningful. So by the time I came to feminism, and I came politically, I came through the left, which I came to call the boys' movement, the male left, and she did as well, but there was nothing for her to transit onto. There was no women's movement. There didn't exist in the early 60s when I got married. So her importance to women in terms of not only the politics, but the language and the content was huge. I'm going to try to read. These letters are to a variety of people, and I couldn't recommend more that you get the journals. And most of the journals have been destroyed by Ted Hughes and his sister Olwen, but some of them escaped, and the same, and we have some of them. Others have been sequestered for 50 years more until after 50 years further than we are now. But, for example, here's some backstory of my history with Plath. I know that you remember this. Back in 1971, Random House was about to publish my first volume of poems. I was just turning 30. She had been 30 when she died. And Monster, the title poem, had been in readings very popular. Poets were first getting over the shock that we were popular, because we're used to giving readings where you have 10 or 12 people show up and say, great. And suddenly there were thousands of people coming to readings. And these were poets of color, and these were women. And they came like almost revival meetings, and they said phrases, "Back with you," and they stomped, and they said, I remember a whole group of women, there were 700 women in the room, and they were stomping and saying, "No, read Monster," which was frightening, but magical. So it was a very powerful time for poets. So you can imagine, there I was, a serious poet who was an unabashed Anglophile, and loved Donne and Marvell and British poets, and was very serious about my first book of poems. To find out suddenly that it was stopped in production at Random House and frozen completely. Why was this? Because Ted Hughes and the estate, the Plath estate, and his sister had discovered, somebody had pointed out this poem called Arraignment, which I had in fact written. I was under the silly illusion that
we had freedom of the press.
Well, there's that. Yeah, and that people like Dante and Pope and Christopher Smart. I mean, satire was not unheard of in English studies. And so I thought, surely a poem. And by the way, this was right around the time when Al Goldstein and all the pornographers were taking pictures
How
of
many
you
people
and
here
Bella.
remember Al Goldstein and all the pornographers? Okay.
Yeah, no, tell that story. And remember what Bella said? Oh, yeah, well, Gloria, the two of them were made an incredible team. So at one point, Al Goldstein had run these centerfolds of the two of them, horribly portrayed and buck naked.
And hanging on the newsstand outside Ms. Magazine, full nudity and right.
And Gloria was really very hurt by this, and she said, well, look, my God, look, they had done a caricature of her, and she said, look, they used my face.
And can I do it?
That's what I'm saying.
And Bella, we remember Bella, saved everything by saying, and my labia. mean, laughter is a great right victory, right?
It's true. It's true. But the problem was that I couldn't. If they could do this to feminists, then mine was a poem. For God's sake, it was a poem. Who would take a poem seriously? So the book was held up for over 7 months in production, and I spent that time crying and vomiting and unimaginable dudgeon because this was my first book of poems. And finally, I decided. I had a wonderful lawyer, Emily Jane Goodman, who, God love her, did it all for free, and then because I didn't have any money, and so she went on to become a justice of the New York State Supreme Court. But in the doing of that, I decided I would try to play around their game. And so I thank God for the rhetorical question. Instead of writing, I accuse Ted Hughes of the murder of Sylvia Plath, which was the original, I wrote, how can I accuse? We need to take our final break now, but I'll be back in just a moment with the last credits. And remember to look for part 2 of the Plath Symposium and Keynote with Steinem and Morgan next week. Happy Poetry Month. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram at The Robin Morgan, and you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book of poems, Dark Matter, and my brand new novel, Parallax, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.